It is 11:33. No, it's 11:36 a.m., which means I'm 3 minutes late for storytelling hour today. 11:33 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays, Miraculous Mercury's Day is when this thing goes down, and I'm excited to take another journey. I'm a bit surprised, actually. I pre-recorded a conversation with Dr. Ann Wolke with History Ann the other night because I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it here on time. And sadly, I just found out that the recording was corrupted or some weird things happened. Streams got crossed. So here we are live. And just wanted to say sorry to History Ann for taking more than an hour of her time the other day. Though what we recorded will not come to light here. But I am here to speak about the light and gratefully educated by History Ann through our conversation that we had the other day. And so I just wanted to honor her, and I will be referencing some of the wisdom that she shared as we move along this course to explore a question that will be very challenging for some. Many would consider actually blasphemy. But the question is Jesus Christ the sun in our sky? Of course, I'm not the first to ask this question, but if you consider Christ as the sun, and the 12 disciples as the 12 signs, the Bible becomes a pretty interesting read. And it's something I actually encourage for folks who have found astrology through this path of having to difficultly clear the cobwebs or the fears that were built into their experience in the church when they were young. For me, that church was called science class, right? I don't think enough of us feel into the truth that scientism is probably the most prevalent religion in modern times, depending on the culture where you come from. You know, this idea that God is dead, quote unquote, and that rationalist approach of scientism is the one and only way. That's a pretty religious thing, I would say, especially when we come into some of the quantum physics, in a sense, where we realize that the observer is influencing the experiment. That's a fantastic thing to consider. But also, from what I've just seen, it's not always this way, and I don't want to generalize. But in general, I often find a pretty significant resistance in academia to consider new lines of thought and also some old ones. I mean, this is something that, of course, as a practicing astrologer and a modern mystic, I find myself up against often. I typically won't share when I'm at the observatory down the road to see an amazing thing through their telescopes, like a Mercury transit, as I did in November 11th, 2019. I typically won't share. I elected this moment to put an offer in on this house we want to buy because I know Mercury's retrograde, but at least he's in the heart of the light, and that's the Cazimi. And if you're going to do it during the retrograde motion, now's the time, right? Typically, I will keep electional astrology and astrology in general on the quiet when I'm hanging out with astronomical folks, right? That being said, if I'm out under the wonders of the night sky, and I'm standing at the side of an astronomer, as I have more than once, or if I sense that an astronomer has an open mind and is willing to speak about, well, like the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac, I'll go there. And I often find that because I've earned some respect by demonstrating that I have astronomical knowledge, it's a little bit easier for me to speak to what I like to call the unmeasurable side of the heavenly happenings, where astronomy, number in time and space, is the measurable side, the things that we could put a ruler to, like a Jupiter Saturn conjunction in the first degree of tropical Aquarius. Like, that's a measurable thing. But how that particular conjunction moved you versus how it moves me, or how it might influence this current time in which I am recording today, because now with the sun in Taurus between Leo Mars and Aquarius Pluto, who's kind of revisiting that Jupiter Saturn degree from December solstice of 2020, right? Does that have any influence on the world in this moment, right? Like, I'm not going to try to convince rationalists to go there, but for me, I am here to, in one of, I think, my most principal devotions, to help the mystical folks and those who are much more interested in the unmeasurable side of the heavenly happenings, which is how does the measurable move me or move us? If I can help them learn more about the measurable side, the astronomy, then we can heal some of this strange divide between astronomy and astrology. It's really between astronomy and correspondences. For astrology is the rainbow bridge, the sacred art that connects the measurable and the immeasurable side, right? So if I can bring those who are way more interested in the immeasurable and remind them that these charts aren't just maps of the soul, they're also maps of the sky, right? For a particular place in a particular moment of time, and help them kind of renature their astrology, then for me, I'm doing what I can to bring some connective tissue to these two sides of the starry study that seem to be so divided. Okay. Anyway, I didn't mean to get into a rap about academia's view of astrology today, but an interesting thing is that astrology is often both demonized by modern science or modern academia and by modern religion alike. Right? So it's one of few things that holds that favor of being hated by both church and classroom, right? Isn't that intriguing? So I have sat often with folks who grew up in a religious household and went to church or temple every weekend, and found that it wasn't for them. It was a very important part of their path, but they at some point turned their back, walked away. Sometimes they were actually ostracized because in the particular faith in which they were raised, divorce was not allowed, or homosexuality was seen as some sin or something, right? And so the resistance for somebody to be themselves or share their life or their experience in a paradigm where it was not allowed, right? I mean, for me to come out as a astrologer when folks are out with their telescopes, a very minor resonance, I guess, with some of those experiences. And so sometimes people have left the church, or the church has left them, and they just have no interest in looking at ancient scripture in any way. And I get it. Sometimes people have been convinced, even by a church, that they might not any longer resonate with, that astrology is some kind of devil's work and you should have never looked there, right? I mean, of course, I'm not typically meeting those people, because these days I'm often meeting people through my work as a consulting astrologer. But one thing I'll often experience in consultation is this slow return to spiritual interest for those who felt ostracized or different and left behind a spirituality or a religion of their youth, right? Well, when people come from a Christian foundation and now they're interested in astrology, I might test the waters by asking them, for example, had they ever considered Christ as the sun in our sky? Of course, I'm encouraged to investigate this topic once again, for we just had Easter. Pretty late Easter this year, wasn't it? On 420, bro. Because Easter, the way that it is celebrated these days, and not by all, there's a kind of a divide between the Orthodox way to keep the calendar and the new. But many, 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 maybe most Christians around the world now are practicing Easter on the Sunday after the full moon, after equinox, which brilliantly honors three sacred cycles, two of them astronomical, and a third astronomicalish, right? This is not how Easter was once calculated, like when to celebrate Easter. And it opens up a wonderful opportunity, I feel, to explore what I've come to know the difference between astronomy and correspondences, or for the sake of ease, let's say the difference between astronomy and astrology. Many astrologers will teach that astronomy and astrology were once the same thing. I actually feel that that's not true, though I've said that many times before I had this personal experience that suggests otherwise. And it is certainly true that the astrologers of old were astronomically inclined, knew the sky, especially in comparison to astrologers of our day. But I should also say that I learned not too long ago about a Hellenistic astronomer named Geminos, who way back then, a couple thousand years ago, was complaining about how astrologers of his era were not astronomically informed. And I laugh because I'm like, wait, did I just steal this guy's shtick a couple millennia late? Like, who is this cat? It gets weird for me, by the way. Geminos, whose text we believe was called Introduction to the Phenomena. That's how it's known now. And Geminos, we know, had written also a text on what you and I would call sacred geometry. At least I would call it sacred geometry. I shouldn't speak for you. We know of that text, but we don't know that text. It's been lost to time. Maybe it will be found again. We can hope. But it's referenced in later works, right? But anyway, the introduction to the phenomenon was basically speaking of astronomy as it was known back then. And some of it's intriguing, right? Like, why do the seasons have different counts of days? And you may not know this, but if we work with the seasons like most of us do, as the months between solstice and equinox, or equinox and solstice, and that solstice and the next equinox, that many of us would call winter, spring, summer, and fall, right? That those are not quarters of a year. that some have less days than others. Some seasons have less days than others. Why is that? From the modern astronomical thought, of course, this is because Earth's orbit of the sun, like all orbits, is not circular, but rather elliptical. We are closest to the sun when the sun is aligned in Earth's Capricorn. So if you prefer the whole Gregorian trip, that's cool. It's around January 1st when Earth is closest to the sun. That's called the sun at perigee, close to Earth. It's odd, but I can't right now think of the name for close to the sun. I'm just like parahelios, but that's not the right word. If anybody wants to educate me in the chat, please do, or re-educate me. But anyway, because Earth is closest to the sun in January, we're actually moving faster in our orbital path at that time. And so from Earth's point of view, the sun's moving faster through our zodiac. Perihelion, thank you, Winter. Close to the sun, right? Whereas we are at aphelion, or far from the sun, when the sun is in Earth's Cancer. It's around July 4th, if you prefer the whole Gregorian trip, that solar calendar. And so when Earth is far from the sun, aphelion, or sun is far from Earth, apogee, that means Earth is moving slower in our orbital path, and therefore, from our experience here on Earth, the sun at that time is moving a bit slower through our zodiac. So we often teach in astrology that the sun moves like 1 degree per day, right? Gets around the 360 degree calendar. 360 degree zodiac in like 365 and a quarter-ish days, right? And so 360, 365, it's like the same 1 degree per day. So look, we're talking about an average, and especially given the truth that the sun is fastest in Cancer and fastest in Capricorn and slowest in Cancer. It just feels weird to say fastest in Capricorn. Be slowest when the sun is in tropical Gemini. And that sounds weird to say as well, right? So anyway, this is the reason why there are different counts of days in the seasons, but that was not the reason reported by Geminos, right? And there's this really kind of interesting illustration of two circles and trying to figure out why this weird thing was happening. Why the sun would orbit the Earth, right, as it was known back then, at like different speeds at different times of the year. It's amazing that they were able to measure that, right? I mean, some of that's simply counting the days between solstice and equinox. But here's an interesting question. How do you know if it's solstice? How do you know if it's equinox? Right? And so some of these mysteries, as they were known a couple thousand years ago, revealed by Geminos. Yeah, so one of you wrote here, that's me reincarnated. I don't believe that's true, but I have giggled more than once about that. I mean, interestingly, Geminos was first translated to a modern language, which was French, in 1975. That's the year that I was born. And then, interesting, was first translated to English in 2005 at the University of Washington in Seattle, which was the year that I graduated from that university. Now, by the way, that would have been happening maybe in history or astronomy. I was in a different building. I was in the engineering building with other nerds pretty far from those, and I had no idea about Geminos or this translation project. But it was weird to like read this later on. It was like, oh. Anyway, I just saw that book again. It's for the first time in a bit, and I'm excited to return to it. And and see some of the things that I can see with my eyes now that I couldn't when I first read Geminos' work 5 years ago, because the sky has taught me so much since then. Because I'm a child of the sky, and I follow the light. I follow the sun. And because I do, I realized, I guess, that I'm Christian. Because I do believe is a weird word, but I do strongly feel that Jesus Christ is the sun in our sky. Now, I want to say this, that for me does not insist that Christ did not come here to earth and found rebirth after crucifixion and all of that. I really don't want to anger anyone here. I mean, it is a little challenging to know, or at least I've been told, that the story of Christ really only appears in the Gospels, or from one historian, right? It's Josephus, right? Who was basically a historian of the empire. I want to just leave that there, because there's other places for us to explore that will ruffle less feathers, or help save me from being struck by lightning live on Starry Telling Hour TV. Historian, when we were speaking the other day, said that there's been a lot of backlash when she goes into spaces like this with David Palmer, who you may know as the Leo King, in a regular show that they have together called History in the Stars. Check it out. And one thing I just have to say is, kind of, happy is the wrong word, but excited to know that there is backlash from Christian folk to an astrology show. Like, not in general. Like, typically I would say, like, never watch an astrology show because that's the devil. That one happens sadly too often. I know a lot of star students or even practicing astrologers who have not revealed their fascination or their profession to their parents because they would be disowned and connected for similar reasons, But if people are watching deep enough into a show, especially if the subject itself is not necessarily like blasphemic or triggering or whatever, that to me means that there's, Christians or people of other religions who are watching astrology podcasts. And there's something in my heart that's really happy about that. And I'm particularly happy when I find folks who are called to the star study and interested in finding resonance between this cosmic craft, not only in the tales of ancient Greece and Rome, but in Babylon, in India, in other places around the world, and even in the Bible. Aquarius Insights asks here, would I say that Christ is a solar archetype? It's an interesting question. It's interesting to ask, like, what is a solar archetype? Right? And I think that's like a pretty personal thing. Scorpiana, my partner, and I are just preparing a journey to the sun for Constellations, the School of Astrology's membership community. By the way, I keep telling those of you in Constellations that there's news coming soon about, well, let's say the resurrection of Constellations. It's going to kind of shift its way in May. Anna and I will actually be broadcasting from our new home. We have a lot of well, for me, I'm looking at books to pack between now and then. We are moving to a new place. But yeah, Anna is going to join me at the beginning of each calendar month or month, to journey to first the sun and the following month the moon, and then to Earth. Hey, we're here. To Mercury, to Venus, to Mars. We'll probably see the nodes even before thrice great Mercury arrives on the scene. I'm really excited to devote a month to a particular planet. And some of this is actually in response to several requests in the community to get a little bit more basic with my transmissions, because some people are very new to the cosmic craft or the starry study. But I feel this would be perhaps of equal or even greater benefit for folks who have been at this for a long time. Because typically we meet the planets in a day or two or a week or maybe a month of year one in astrology. And of course, we are forging our relationship along the way. For me, if you want to really connect with the sun in the sky, you got to get outside and do a bit of the shadow play as well. If you have the courage to turn your back to the light and let the sun embrace the back of your heart, you can see that your shadow, right, points to the earth. And when the sun's in, the 11th as he is now, the shadow points to the 5th. So let's play. Anyway, I'm excited to share practices from the mystical astronomical or sacred astronomical approach to really connect with the sun for a month and then the moon, etc. I will be sharing also some of the keys from the other mystery traditions like sacred geometry and number magic and musical harmony. And so stay tuned for that. If you're not a member of Constellations, a School of Astrology's membership group, this would be a great time to sign up, because we will only be offering the maiden voyage price, or turns out it's been the first year's price, of $16 a month or $160 per year, for a very short amount of time still. For those of you, and there's many of you here who are members of Constellations, you're locked in, right? Whatever you signed up for, if you stay signed up, that's where you're going to live moving forward. All right. So no worries there. But I'm really excited to take a journey and a deep dive with these planets. So all of this, by the way, in response to this question of would I say that Christ is a solar archetype? Well, what is a solar archetype? And one of the ways I like to explore that is to look at, well, solar gods and goddesses, right? So, wait, what? There can be goddesses? Isn't the solar archetype the masculine, right? So that's just what I mean by, like, it's kind of subjective, right? It's actually very cultural, and that's interesting. And even looking at, like, oh, I'm sorry that I can't pronounce her name on the spot right now. Anybody know the Japanese sun goddess? Amasaratu. If you do, please put that in the chat so I can try to retract a little bit of my personal embarrassment. But most astrologers teach like the sun is a dude and the moon is a gal. I don't think they use those terms, right? And so we've been tasked, I think, or challenged to really explore what the masculine and the feminine are in recent years, maybe more than, and I don't know, hundreds, thousands of years on Earth. Well, I should, just speaking for myself, like that's been very true for me in this last decade, and challenges through people that I'm honored to sit with an astrological consultation. It's really helped me kind of realign the way that I practice astrology and how I know the world. I know the sun is a magnetic fern, is a comment here. Oh, magnetic femme. I'm sorry. That's just evidence that I need glasses more than I once did. But yeah, we can look at solar beings throughout the mysteries of time and culture around the world. And it's interesting to see beings like Ra, right? Or Horus, Heru, to speak his name from the older language. Mithras, many mention as a solar being. That one may be a little bit less clear than it would be for others. Surya. Some would say Rama, right? It kind of depends. And I'm looking actually over here at the bookshelf that's slowly dwindling, for many have made their way into boxes already. But there's a wonderful text that I always recommend. Though I try to avoid astrological cookbooks, meaning like the sun in Aries equals this, and the sun in Taurus equals this, and Venus in Taurus equals this, right? But if I'm going to cook, a cookbook that I like to refer to is the wonderful text by Raven Caldera called Myth-Astrology, one word, fortunately now republished because it had gotten very difficult to find and expensive if you could. But now you can get Myth-Astrology for a reasonable rate, and it's one I really highly recommend you do. Raven in this text provides a different mythic character from many traditions, not the Christian, but from the Greco-Roman traditions, from the Vedic traditions, from the Celtic Druidic traditions, and others. And so, Mercury in Pisces is Orpheus. I'm not sure, by the way, if that's what Raven Caldera suggests in Myth-Astrology, but that's one that would certainly make sense. Whereas the sun in Pisces would be Dionysus, or maybe Christ. So Chasharashi is a feminine sun goddess. Um, Offers one wonderful cosmos here. Maybe those X's sounds like X, but I know at least like in many of the Mexican traditions, X is pronounced SH, and so that's what I'm thinking there. Chasharashi, pardon me if I'm not pronouncing that clearly, right? Yeah, and in Japan, at least one vision of the moon and sun is they were twins, and the moon was a boy and the sun was a girl. And I really appreciate that, because I think we need to be careful with masculine and feminine. And it's not like Aquarius Insights was suggesting that in any way when she asked a simple question of, hey, would you say that Christ is a solar archetype? I would say Christ is the sun. However, there's so much moon in the teachings of Christ too. I'll share something I had heard some time ago. Oh gosh, I can't remember from whose voice this was. It was a modern researcher, mystic into a Gnostic tradition. John, who is this? It's not going to come here. And I don't know that it necessarily vibrate with me, but basically through some of the non-canonic gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, but other ones like the hypostasis of the archons and other interesting texts that were unburied in the Dead Sea Scroll findings, which I think was 1947, or maybe that was the year of the Nag Hammadi discovery. And in those findings, texts that didn't make the cut, like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Yes, there is one, or the Gospel of Thomas, or weird texts like the hypostasis of the archons came forward. And this mystic suggested this interesting tale that goes like this: that, of course, all beings are both yin and yang, feminine, masculine, intertwined, and that this very strange thing happened when one of the aeons, in his telling, blasted forth from the galactic center and separated from her masculine side. And this was Sophia. By the way, once again, I just want to say, I'm not saying this is how it was. But then that was like she became the earth. And she realized that she had made this mistake because suddenly the earth was purely feminine and therefore not balanced in this way. And that she herself tried to create balance before her mistake was detected by maybe the only thing that was in any way, quote unquote, higher than her, by creating the demiurge. And having then demiurge like believe that he was the creator, that he had created earth, and then he was tasked through his creation of the angels and archangels, or the archons, to kind of finish the job and bring forth the creatures of the sea and the land and the creeping things and other stuff like that. You might know demiurge by a different name. Anyway, that this didn't go so well because once he found out about Sophia, who was wisdom, and that there was something that created him, he completely lost it. And anyway, according to this teacher, I wonder if anybody knows about this, and if you do, you could put his name forward. It's like tip of my tongue. But that's why Christ was sent. That Christ was sent as this like very kind of feminine resonance in masculine body to bring the balance. And that the whole point of Christ and the resurrection and the dying for the sins and all these things was to kind of course correct from this separation of the eon called Sophia from her masculine half. How weird that I find myself here, but that's what I so personally appreciate about Storytelling Hour, where I don't typically arrive with much of a plan, and the steerings of community and even a simple question or a comment in the chat can help kind of, I don't know, fuel our journey into who knows where. Is Christ a solar archetype? What is a solar archetype? Now, for me, just experiencing the truth that the original zodiacs were lunar. Why? Because you can't see the stars to which the sun is aligned with. You will go blind. So if zodiacs are actually groups of stars, which by the way itself is debatable, and it's a debate that I will be entertaining through one of my presentations at the NORWAC conference in Seattle next month, which you can now also join online, NORWAC, I think.org. Norwac.net to find out more. But one of my talks is What in the Heavens is the Tropical Zodiac. I will actually be journeying into the question of what in the heavens is the zodiac, and I'll speak about constellational zodiacs, including that Ophiuchi thing, and the sidereal zodiacs, and also the tropical zodiac. But part of the slides I'm actually just right now creating to try to get ahead is the reminder that if the zodiac itself was born by following the planets through the stars, let's say planetes means moving star, right? So the moving stars or wandering stars through the fixed stars, then that certainly was not the result of following the sun. And for me, it really is one of the best places to celebrate, and I shouldn't use that word, but the strange disconnect between astrology and the living sky these days is I often hear people be like, oh, when it's like you can't ever see the stars that the sun is aligned with. It's like you never went and tried. So why do I share this at all? Well, it helps me rewind, or as we like to say, retrograde back to the place I was playing before. That question steered me in a different direction. But these many branches I'm called to climb all emanate from the same trunk, and we have some more time to go explore that particular branch, which we see bathing in the light of the sun, and ask about the solar archetype in the Christ. But I wanted to rewind to what I feel now in my experiential heart is the difference between astronomy and astrology. Or I'd like to say astronomy and correspondence is where, again, astrology is the rainbow bridge or the high art between the two. But let's just say astronomy and astrology to help this land. For me, astronomy is like the measurable side of the heavenly happenings. Why would we measure the sky? Well, what time is it? And I can look right here at the screen of like a phone, they call it. It's so much more. That says it's 12:17 p.m. What's p.m. mean? And how weird that it's noon before it's noon. But anyway, and it tells me it's Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025. Well, that's convenient. But even receiving date and time from a screen, from a small screen, disconnects me from the big screen of the living sky. Now, how did we used to know what day it was? How did we used to know what time it was before phones and computers? Or, I mean, even, conveniently printed calendars where we can flip the page every month or whatever it may be. We followed the sun or followed the moon or both, and stars and the other wanderers too. And that's astronomy, folks. And the reason why I was first inspired to go here many, many moons, many, many minutes ago, was how do you calculate the date for Easter? I mean, many suggest that these signs and cycles and our knowledge of them was really first born out of the need to plan our rituals and ceremonies, which on one level I find beautiful, although I have to say I'm personally offended when I go to sacred sites. And when I do, by the way, I don't typically sign up for a group tour, but I love to listen into them. And I so often hear this thing about, well, there's so many stones, and it's been found that perhaps that count shows us evidence that the ancient builders could predict eclipses. Why would you do that? Well, if you can predict an eclipse, and indeed on the day when you said it would go down, shadow overcomes the earth, and you can oogie booga booga booga. You can scare everybody and control them with your great magic, right? Like, have you heard that rap before? I have heard it so many times. Again, it really hurts my soul when I hear that, as if the only reason to create a system that would allow you to predict the timing of eclipse is to scare people or keep them under control or deceive them into believing you have some kind of magic that you don't, because of course magic doesn't exist, right? Like that one hurts me because that is just the result of the rationalist worldview that actually tries to convince us that magic does not exist, is not a thing. And for those of us who have studied astrology and elections and timings, well, we're often utilizing the powers of this cosmic craft for just that. And being able to predict an eclipse might help you in many more ways than just to ooga booga scare people so you can convince them you have a magic you don't, or for the purpose of control. Right. Ceremonial timings. The importance of a ceremonial timing. We don't have to go into the ancients to unpack the truth that astronomy is utilized for this, because many, many, many millions of people around the world just celebrated the rebirth of the sun on a Sunday following the full moon, following the Aries equinox. They wouldn't call it the Aries equinox. They might call it the spring equinox or the vernal equinox, but to do so would be a hemispheric thing. And there's many people who celebrated that particular ceremony south of the equator as well, where Aries equinox, or east equinox as I prefer to call it, means autumnal equinox, right? Why do I call it east equinox? Well, I think that's going to help me show why, through my own astrological or astronomical pursuits, I've become convinced that Jesus Christ is not the S-O-N Son of Man, but the S-U-N Son of Man. And by the way, I, of course, when I quote Christ in that way, am not referring to people with penises. I recently learned that what we now call men were once called weirmen, like werewolves. That's interesting. And women were called withmen, right? Which is the source of women and of wife, by the way. And you don't hear men called weirmen often these days, do you? Suddenly the term men, which actually applied to all humans, now typically is used to express the male adult human, right? Or a group of them. So anyway, to quote from the text, I don't think it's a patriarchal thing when Christ says, I am the light and the way, and I am the Son of Man, right? As in, you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven and sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. Wait, what? Let's get back to that too. Planting seeds, my friends. So I have become convinced personally, which I think maybe is a lesser statement than belief, that Christ is the sun in our sky, that the 12 disciples are the 12 signs through which the sun travels each year. A little key there, by the way, is Thomas, who you may know was one of the 12 disciples. Actually, Didymus Thomas. Thomas means twins. And Didymus means twins in a different language. And I don't speak many languages, and I'm linguistically and etymologically ignorant. So I think sometimes I make assumptions that only work in English and otherwise break down. But if English is a new language, there would be more opportunity for people to intentionally encode homonyms like sun and sun. And I am told actually that in the Greek, there's something about Helios as sun and children as well that's related. And maybe some of you here who speaks or knows how to read or has investigated the Greek could speak to that a bit. I'd rather just say, I'm ignorant. Because I am. But that's a simple ignorant. So, it's interesting to consider Didymus Thomas as twins. Does this in any way suggest that Thomas is the sign that you and I call Gemini? I feel it does. Now, many folks have come to this approach. There are a few books on these shelves that are trying to relate which of the signs corresponds with which of the 12 disciples, or from an earlier time or earlier tradition, which of the signs corresponds with which of the 12 tribes of Israel. We see 12, of course, in the mythic teachings of many, many lands. I would suggest it's the same reason why there are 12 signs, because creation creates in 12s. And for me, we can hear that in the 12 half steps in Western harmony that divide an octave of frequency. But I think we also especially see it here in this sacred form that many of us these days call the seed of life, which we found all over the world, because when you start sweeping a compass and making circles, it's very easy to see the sacred 7 of 6 intertwined about an inner one. And here in the seed of life, we find an inner petal of 6-petaled flower and an outer 6-petaled flower as well. Those are the polarities of the zodiac, the inner signs and the outer signs. And 3 goes to 7 goes to 12. And that's a long tail, but something I'm so excited to share again and to explore in Constellations throughout the year ahead. There is a fascinating text by the most fascinating John Michel called 12 Tribe Nations, where he shows you how common the 12-fold archetype has been in different mythic traditions and even civilization building over time. I want to, as I am now, find a whole bunch of slides that I can show you. So to do so, however, I've got to prepare them for you. So I am now multitasking in a serious way. Some of these we can do without pictures, but some of them really do want the pictures, which tell 1,000 words, and animations, which might tell, I guess 1 million. I don't know the math on that one. So you may have seen, like for me, I think it was Zeitgeist, the film, that was first to introduce this idea that there have been many solar archetypes over time, including Heru, who you might know as Horus. Some pronounce that hours, by the way. That seem to have been born around winter solstice of a virgin mother that rolled around with 12 disciples, though maybe they were named in a different way, that performed miracles, including raising the dead, that themselves were resurrected after death, and in that regard were twice born, right? I found also many arguments against that bit from that film, Zeitgeist. I will say some of the astrotheology that film presents around the birth of the sun at December 25th, because you follow the bright star, that's Sirius, and then rises the Virgin, and then the sun is born from there. I don't know that it really works. And It would work less a couple thousand years ago than it does now because of precession. I'll save that for Christmas exploration. I want to speak about Easter. I will say that if Christ is the sun in the sky, and if this is a northern hemisphere experience, which of course Jerusalem and Bethlehem and other places in that mythic tradition or tradition would be, then clearly the sun is born at winter solstice time. And by the way, there's been all sorts of weird calendar challenge over time. And so I'm going to retrograde once again back to astronomy versus astrology. So one of the reasons to learn to keep the days might be ceremonial timing. So if you're of the Christian faith, when is Christmas? Now, back in the day, before I could look at the date on a calendar, or especially these days, and we get literally I'm getting a time beamed to me from a satellite that's recording time or being presented time from an atomic clock. Shit has changed, friends. Back in the day, how do you do that? I mean, consider if you're a shepherd with your flock living pretty far away, but you are a shepherd of some faith and you want to practice Christmas and Easter, or you're of a different faith and you know that ceremonial timing should go this way, or you're a farmer and you're working this huge land and you're pretty far from your neighbors. How do you get the news? Somebody's coming around on horseback or something? No, you learn to read the stars. And by the way, you've already learned how to read the stars, because if you're a shepherd or you're working animal husbandry, as they call it, you better know timings. And if you're a farmer and you're into that whole thing called agriculture, you better know how to keep the seasons, right? And if you're a nomadic people, also, you better know how to read the sky to know when to go, because you probably don't want to leave this particular place and head to the next location to find the berries on the bush until the berries are on the bush. Do you know what I'm saying? So anyone who's, nomadic or agricultural, and that probably covers every one of our ancient ancestors, better know how to read the sky, or at least have somebody on the tribe that does. And hopefully that elder has an apprentice or keeps a crew, right, of different folks, right? And we get to hear things from Hesiod's working days about what you do to the field when you first see the Pleiades reborn in the morning sky, things like this. By the way, it also lives in the myths, places where we have preserved the ancient wisdom. Some of it quite as simple as the dates to have your journey. Let me tell you a tale from the ancient stories that might support this opinion or thesis. There's a tale of Orion losing his sight. Why? He was punished. Orion in the Greek myths, pardon my language, but was kind of a dick. Maybe more than kind of. At one point, he declared, maybe to win the favor of Artemis, that he was a greater archer than her, and that he was such a great archer that he could kill every living thing on Earth. It's said, by the way, that that's when Gaia created Scorpius, right? And that the scorpion here is hunting Orion to prevent him from committing this murder of everything on Earth. And look, this is an astronomical tale, right? the Scorpion constellation rises when the Orion constellation sets, right? And in that sense, quote unquote, kills Orion, right? One image of the death of Orion would be a nightly thing, right? Orion simply setting, so going to the underworld, going into the places below. But there's also an annual death of stars that are on this path of the sun, as Orion, or at least the right hand of the mighty one, oh sorry, the club of Orion is. Months ago, I saw Orion setting at sunrise, right? When the sun was in the Scorpion, then Orion set when the sun rose. Right? Now the sun is much, much closer to Orion. In our day and age, Orion's club hosts the travel of the sun at Northstice or Cancer solstice, June solstice time. So we can't see this because when you try to see the stars while the sun is in the sky, you'll go blind. You see what I mean? But in our day and age, the apps help us see this beautiful truth that it's like Orion is holding a solar snow cone. Is there such thing as a solar snow cone? Because one thing I do know about the sun is it will melt some ice. Anyway, Orion's got this torch, right, illuminated by the sun at northern hemisphere summer solstice time in our day and age. That changes with precession. It's a very important thing, and I believe it's something that Christ speaks about in the Bible, and I do want to share that with you today because it talks to us about how amazingly important our time now is. He says as he goes to open some other slideshow he built a gazillion years ago. Right. So every year there's an annual death of Orion. It's okay, baby. He's going to come back. And what that time is when the sun moves in to that space, right? Because then Orion is in the cave. Now, my baby, who you probably just heard, is named Maya. She's named after one of the Pleiades. She's named after one of those daughters of Atlas who said left her heavenly place to live a humble life in a cave on Earth. And it said that Jupiter, away from the ever watchful gaze of Hera, visited Maya in this cave. And shortly thereafter, oh, my great guide, Hermes came forth, right? This is the birth of Mercury from Maya in her cave. Well, what would Maya in the cave be and Jupiter visiting Maya in the cave? And many of you probably heard me speak about this before. I'm sure this is an astronomical tale of the time each year when the sun comes to the Pleiades, because at that time the Pleiades go what we call under the beams, right? And then when the sun passes the Pleiades by, the Pleiades are reborn. The time, interestingly, in my opinion, when the Pleiades are hidden behind the bright light of the sun, I believe that's the Pleiades in the cave. Before that time, they're evening stars. We see them after sunset. Then the fire of the sun comes, takes them under the beams. And then later, after the sun passes them by, the Pleiades are reborn in the eastern sky. And you don't want to use, by the way, Hesiod's agricultural code of what you do at that time based upon his transmission in work in days, because that was written more than 2,000 years ago. And the heliacal rise of the Pleiades now is about a month offset from when it used to be due to precession. My baby was born like the exact day of the heliacal rising of the Pleiades from where we live. It was a pretty cool convenience to her name, which had come through for me many, many moons before. Now, Jupiter at the time of Maya's birth, this Maya's birth, was with the Pleiades. But the way that Mercury comes out and walks the cows backward and stuff, that didn't align at that year. But Jupiter's only with the Pleiades in the cave. So Sun, Jupiter, Pleiades every 12 years, right? Because Jupiter has to be in that same sign, if you will, that the Pleiades occupy, which in our day and age is the cusp between tropical Taurus and Gemini, at the time of the year that the sun is there too. And that happened recently, and our baby was born, which is for me quite a magical thing. So going into the cave, well, that might sound, there might be some of that in the Christ story too, yes? Interesting. Going into the cave, I feel is actually an old transmission of a planet or a star going under the beams of the sun, as the moon does every month. It reminds me to go find another thing I had queued up. Right, great. We're ready to go with a bunch of things. How exciting, if he ever gets to it. Now, the story of Orion going blind, I also believe is a tale of Orion losing his sight. I mean, of us losing our sight of Orion. Because every year when the sun gets to that space, Orion is lost in the flames. Or apparently so, going under the beams of the sun, and it takes, well, maybe 40 days and 40 nights, maybe 70, like it is for Sirius, actually less for Orion. For Orion then to be reborn as morning stars, right? So they're in the evening stars right now as I'm recording this in April 2025, as they call it. I've been watching Orion at night. We're starting to lose some of Orion's stars. I've been watching Jupiter in that zone and the horns of the bull, which Orion chases through the skies, right? The bull is protecting the Pleiades from Orion, from other tales you may know that I choose not to repeat. But soon the sun, who's kind of ticking through about 1 degree per day, is going to be in that space and no Orion for you. So there's one terrible thing Orion did, according to the old Greek myths, and he was punished by having his sight taken from him. But he was also told that his sight could return if he could make it to a special land to see Helios rising in the east, right? So we're talking about the sun. And so what happens now is Orion finds a young one, interestingly, I think, to guide him, a young boy with sight, to guide him to this place, which is east of where he was. And when he sees the rising of the sun from this eastern land, his sight is returned to him, the resurrection of Orion's sight. Interesting, right? Now, I believe that might be recorded, or the remnants of recordings of an ancient culture that knew at the time of Orion's disappearance into the beams of the sun, which happens each year, that they were meant to go east. It's certainly, for me, undeniably a tale of the annual setting and rising of Orion. So Orion will rise every day and set every day or night, depending on where the sun is in respect to Orion, right? We might see that in the middle of the night. We might see that at sunrise. We might not see that at all because the sun's with Orion, because Orion also has an annual death, right? The heliacal setting of Orion, Orion in the cave, or Orion losing his sight, or us losing our sight of Orion, and then Orion going to the east to be reborn, which is now the sun has passed Orion by, and we see the heliacal rise, or the annual rise of Orion in the eastern sky. Dig it? Orion easting. Easter. I am told that in the land of Kemet, that most of us now know as Egypt, back in the day, there was no word for death. You would simply say westing. For it was known that what died in the West didn't die at all. If it could make it through its underworld journey, through the Duat, it would be reborn in the East. So you don't say death, you say westing, right? So maybe in the Christ story, westing into the cave and then reborn in the Easter. Easter does oddly have the name of a direction embedded in it. Now, that has me wondering what Easter was called in ancient times in other languages. I will say that I've been told it seems to link to Ishtar. Well, who is Ishtar? Or maybe to Ostera and to Oster or Ooster. Who is that? Well, let's go there too, my friends. But first, a little bit more of this astronomy versus astrology. If you are learning the cycles of the sun through the stars, and look, that's a yearly thing. So that's a long period of time. How about just sunrise to its reach, to its rest, to its roots, doing the days? But that's a pretty short period of time. So how about months, somewhere in between? And so we see the moon reborn in the sunset west. After her, monthly journey into the cave. You see, the moon every month dies to our eyes for like 3 days and 3 nights. The old moon, the crone moon, Hecate's bow, right, which we see before sunrise. This is opposite than the death and the rebirth of the stars, right? Orion, Pleiades, they're going to die in the west as the sun overcomes them, taking them into the cave, taking them under the beams, making them blind, making us blind to them, and then they are going to be reborn with their heliacal rise in the east. That's true, by the way, for the exterior planets, for Mars, for Jupiter, for Saturn, and even for the ones that we can't see, but we can't see them. It's true for Mercury and Venus, but they also die in the east and are reborn in the west because the interior decorators are quite special. And maybe we'll speak a bit more about Venus when we return to these 40 days of Lent. Or the 40 years in the desert even. But maybe that's going to bring us back to Jupiter. Wait, what? Oh, well, we were talking about the sun. Right. So anyway, as we're following the moon and the sun, learning to read the stars, maybe we're doing that for quite practical purpose. And by the way, I'm working with the stars to know when to put our house on the market. I feel like that's quite a practical purpose for investments and such, right? I'm working with the stars to work with people on their own healing journey. I feel that's quite a practical purpose. Some of that gets quite mystical. Rationalists would say that's not practical at all. How do you say? Oh, fuck them. Pardon me. But like, if we're learning to follow the moon and the sun and the stars and the other planetas, like, simply to know when to journey, right? Or to know when to plant and sow. We need to do that intently. I mean, at some point, you kind of crack the code and then you could just print out a calendar. Well, back in the day, printing a calendar meant writing the whole thing, and that's kind of a drag. Carving moon phases into animal bones, is painting things in cave walls. We've seen evidence of all of this, of course. But if you can do it and you just do it real time. Now, sometimes clouds don't allow a view of the moon and the sun and the stars in our sky, right? So you want to have your game together in such a way that you can do this mathematically and to keep a calendar and the like, right? But what I'm saying is that once you learn how to read the stars, like you know what it means when Orion goes blind and what to do about your fields in the meantime, um, then you're just going to actively participate. Now, if you actively participate with the heavens, so whether you're doing that for your nomadic or your agricultural timings, or if you're doing that to lay out your ceremonial dates, what's going to happen to you? You, my friend, will become a mystic. Why? Because the sun and the moon are beings. Now, that's my religion. And I offer that just to say this. Anyone who's forming a bond with the planets and the stars, I feel will become more and more and more susceptible to not only witnessing similar strange things happening on Earth below as the cycles realign in the heavens above, but also they create a conduit for the heavenly spirit above and the earthly spirit below to show that they are a living vow to the marriage of heaven and earth. And mystical, strange things happen to me, right? I mean, these days, many of us really need to break through some thick walls of the programming in school that told us like reality is only what you can see. In fact, you know what? It's not what you can see. It's what the specialists can see. And you just trust the science. Yeah. So don't have your own experience. For heaven forbid, don't do your own research. That's as bad as reading Tolkien or Orwell. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I keep promising myself I won't go there. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. For me, astronomy is the measurable side that's necessary for keeping your calendar. And correspondences is the immeasurable side, but the rainbow bridge between the the high art, the sacred science of astrology is really born out of this connection above and below, to witnessing that there are cycles on earth that correspond to the cycles in the heavens, like real estate prices with the lunar nodes. And also to align your spine in such a way with the heavens above and the earth beneath that you become a conduit for the exchange of this information between the two, and then you just start getting the news. In other words, you get weird, right? And so that's not going to happen to all astronomers or all nomadic peoples or all, farmers. It's definitely not going to happen to the arrogant folks that the tour guides at the sacred sites tell me about, the ones who learn how to track eclipse timings just so they can oogie boogie the people around them and keep their control by forcing them to believe in their magic, which of course is false because you need a clear channel. And it's hard to connect under the street lamps, but we can. Okay. So how do we know it's Christmas time? It's the longest night of the year. But how do you know it's the longest night? It's cold. But it actually gets colder after the longest night. And by the way, I'm going to speak Northern Hemisphere experience a bit. All right. So pardon me to our friends who are beaming in from down under. Now, it's the solstice because the sun sets as far south or rises as far south as it ever can. It's at its bounds. Now, by the way, that's when it's the solstice, because there's a northstice too. And by the way, here's your Earth. Okay, northstice is when the Earth in our orbit about the sun arranges in a moment of time for the sun to be that place on the sun's path, the ecliptic, that Earth's North Pole is eternally leaning towards. And by the way, in our day and age, even though in tropical astrology, we will say that that's the sun ingressing Cancer, it is certainly not in the Cancer constellation, which I prefer to call the Crab constellation, to differentiate constellations from signs, because, my friends, they are very different things. And I'm ever grateful to my first teacher, Daniel Gemario of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School, for helping me differentiate the two. They're all very crucial. But in our day and age, the Cancer solstice sun is being kicked by one of the heavenly twins, and it's on the hand of the high man. Oh, sorry to say, it's on the club of Orion, okay? What is Cancer about it at all if it's not aligned with the crab? It's right above Earth's Tropic of Cancer. That's the key to the tropical zodiac. Like so many sacred systems of ancient wisdom traditions, the tropical zodiac is a directional device. In fact, I would suggest its signs are not only directionally aligned, but perhaps energetically directionally defined. So the North Pole of Earth, and I mean Santa's place, right? But also the North Celestial Pole that points in the sky. That's the point that is closest on the sun's track, right? The plane of the year, the ecliptic, the heart of the zodiac. That point that's closest to North Star, the North Celestial Pole, that's the Tropic of Cancer. And every year, the sun goes from its northern bounds, the Tropic of Cancer, to its southern bounds, the Tropic of Capricorn. The zero Cancer is north, zero Capricorn is south. And when the sun's at its southern extreme, which is about, in our day and age, 23.5 degrees-ish south of the equator. Actually, it's 23.4. But if you say that, you have to honor that the Arctics are 66.6, and nobody wants to say that shit. Anyway, when the sun's at its southern extreme, right, when the sun ingresses Capricorn, it's shining directly above Earth's Tropic of Capricorn. When the south pole of Earth is leaning towards the light, the sun ingresses Capricorn and it shines above the Tropic of Capricorn. And then the goat begins its annual climb. That, my friends, is not about stars in the sky, other than that big bright one of ours called Jesus Christ. Called the sun. Now, when the sun ingresses Capricorn, it's furthest from Jerusalem and from California, where I live. And therefore, the midday sun is at its depths, its lowest in the sky, right? That's the shortest day and the longest night for the Northern Hemisphere experience, right? And then the goat will begin the climb. So midday sun every day thereafter is going to be higher and higher. Well, the lowest midday sun of the year casts the longest midday shadow. And it's the midday shadow because it will be pointing due north. I'm speaking Northern Hemisphere experience, where the midday sun is due south. That's what we used to call noon. Now we have to call it local apparent solar noon because of clock time. And, it's 1 now, but I'm in daylight losings crime. So it's actually 12. And right. So anyway, noon is just the height of the light every day. And in the northern hemisphere, the sun's south, it's at midday, so the shadow is north. Once you draw that line on the ground, well, then you will see that the shadow of the stick, which can be me or the gnomon of my sundial, is on that line at midday every day. You'll also notice over time that shadow grows longer and shorter throughout the year. Because at summer solstice, right, midday, the height of the light, that's the shortest shadow. And then it starts growing longer every day as the sun slowly and then quickly falls in the sky at midday, right? And for 6 months, the shadow gets longer, and 6 months, the shadow gets shorter. And either way, you get the Gemini glyph. It's really the same line, but one's going that way and one's coming back. Or you can watch the sun in the sky. You might even set up an obelisk or a totem pole so that if you sit in a chair exactly north of it, you can watch the midday sun on that pole slowly climb from, like the whale to the thunderbird or whatever it may be. Hopefully I'm not offending anyone by speaking in that way. The Gemini glyph, up and down. The Cancer glyph is the sun on the horizons. Because every year the sun does this dance from its northern extreme, that's tropical Cancer, to its southern extreme, that's the Tropic of Capricorn. And when the sun's at the Tropic of Capricorn, it's rising furthest south of due east, and it's setting furthest south of due west. And that's how you know it is solstice time. So I'm reading here from Discerning Light, Silent Night. Right? So the longest night. Now, if you've ever done this work with a horizon calendar, which I've been very blessed to have had the opportunity to do with this house that we are now moving away from, and it kind of hurts me. But we can see clouds allowing sunset every day of the year. And I've really been watching them since we know we're moving. But I've been watching them for the 5 years we've lived here. And there's a hill over here I call Solstice Hill. There's actually a tree I call the birthing tree. That's where the Capricorn solstice sun sets. It's the point furthest south of west of the sun's path, of the heart of the zodiac. Now, the moon can go out of bounds and be further south than that. I've learned that. When Venus is out of bounds south, I see it. It's amazing. And it's helping me connect to the way that my ancestors did this. And it's actually simple. It's as simple as a flower, and that's a complicated thing. And as I'm experiencing this and witnessing this, I'm listening to the sky more than I'm telling the sky what it is and does, which I feel is one of the challenges of astrology. And it's helped me understand things like in the cave is under the beams, that the blinding of Orion is under the beams, that the resurrection of Osiris. Oh, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, so of course the sun is born at winter solstice time. Now the deal is, and you've probably done this, you run one direction, you stop, you touch the ground, you turn around and come back, or the kick turn in the swimming pool. When the sun's at an extreme, whether it's the southern extreme, the Tropic of Capricorn, or it's northern extreme, the Tropic of Cancer, the sun's really slowing down, and solstice means the sun stops. And tropics, by the way, comes from tropikos, which is Greek for turn around. That's hence the Tropic of Capricorn, the tropical zodiac, right? So as the sun's coming to solstice and then solstice happens and it's coming back, it's kind of really hard to tell which of those days is the longest night in the calendar in this regard. The shadow too. It's like the sun's getting to its lowest point like for weeks. And then it's climbing out of that lowest point for weeks, right? In between at the equinoxes, it's kind of flying, because it's in the middle of the lane between the kick turns, you see. But at the turnaround points, it's like kind of hard to discern. But the sun hangs out there for a while, and some argue December 25th rather than December 21st to speak Gregorian talk, which we know typically hosts the Capricorn solstice. Because it takes a few days. And by the way, you can actually see that, and I've seen that, and I've photographed like decently, that between say December 18th and 24th, the sun's really there, setting at its like most southern location. And then by December 25th, you can see that it's now, like I can see that it's now off the birthing tree, as I call it, the tree on Solstice Hill that sets from this point of view, that hosts the sun's most southern set, right? And then the sun is born, because now from the longest night, the light is born, right? So this idea that Christ is born at Christmas time, which, by the way, if you've done the research or listened to the tales, doesn't vibe with the whole shepherds and stuff that's like on scene during Christ's birth. And the manger would be real cold, y'all. But it, like perhaps older traditions and keeping older traditions, which is something the empire did, right? Instead of in their, colonialism and conquest, instead of completely erasing the traditions of every peoples that they conquered in an attempt, I think, to accelerate assimilation, they renamed some of their ancient deities and kept some of their ancient days, but rewrote the myths in such a way that participated with this new religion. Now you can hear my hesitance in trying to say that with as little offense as I can. And that's a very general expression, but hopefully it's enough for you to fill in the blanks and to teach me a gazillion things along the way. All right, well, that would be the birth. I mean, the resurrection just happens a few months later, which seems quite strange. First, let's do the astronomy of East Equinox. So let's take you to the slides. Anyone having fun? If you are, this would be the right time to give this video a like, regardless of where and when you are watching it. Storytelling hour's already gone 90 minutes. It's the time in which I should be packing boxes. And by the way, I'll say again, I hope you'll head over to check out History in the Stars and to check out Historian. She recorded this brilliant conversation with me about this stuff. Not all the places where we've gone today, but other places we probably won't have time to. And sadly, like the recording just got corrupted, so I feel really bad about that. But she's amazing. Go check her out. She's been here for Storytelling Hour before. All right. Yeah, please like the video, subscribe, all those things. Support the work. You can do so also, by the way, if you'd like, by finding your way to the donate button at GeminiBrett.com, where you could book sessions with me and also learn about constellations. Join our community. Cool. All right. At the School of Earth Astrology. So we are going to kind of quickly tune in to the annual serpent of the sun. And, I think I will rewind and show you this again. So we are starting with the sun at East Equinox. All right. And the sun from here, which every year is the passing over of the equator of Earth's plane of our daily rotation, right? The ecliptic, the sun's path, the plane of the year, which is different than the equator because of the tilt of Earth. There are two places where the plane of the day, the equator, which I like to call the circle of matter, and the plane of the year, the ecliptic, which I like to call the circle of spirit, for it's where the sun lives. There's two places where they intersect, and they are the equinox points. So you see here the Aries glyph, and you see over here the Libra glyph, okay? Now the solstice points are the two places where the circle of spirit, the plane of the year, the ecliptic, the sun's path, most diverge from the equator. This is called extreme declination. All right. So the Tropic of Cancer is the most northern point because it is the place where our North Pole leans. It's about 23.5 degrees north of the equator, right? And then the Tropic of Capricorn is about 23.5 degrees south of the equator. It's the point of the sun's path towards which our south rotational axis is always leaning. All right. So we're going to see the sun here, and you climb from zero declination, which means on the equator, as it only is during the equinoxes, when it rises due east and sets due west. And we're going to see it climb to its northern extreme in declination. So this kind of sine wave you see at the bottom, this is a declination graph, and you'll see 0 Aries and 0 Libra are on zero declination. That's on the equator, where 0 Cancer is the northern extreme and 0 Capricorn is the southern extreme. And this goes quite quickly. But there we go to the northern extreme, and then Cancer and Leo, Virgo are north, but bringing us back to the equator, and then to the southern extreme, 0 Capricorn, and then coming back to the equator. Okay, so every year the sun passes over the equator. Oh, at this cross. So you see the sun on the cross, right? The crossing of the ecliptic and the equator. Now there's 2 of them. One of them, 0 Libra, is due west of the center of the earth. And I suggest that's why the Libra glyph is not just scales. It looks like the sun setting into the horizon, the ultimate experiential image of westing. Okay. But what about east? What about that Aries glyph? Well, before we go there, let's talk about the truth that bunnies are mammals. So what in the heavens is up with Easter egg hunts for the bunnies' eggs? Well, perhaps the bunnies on the left are demonstrating a little story or two about that one in their positioning. This is a fertility thing, right? Now, again, this would be more of a Northern Hemisphere story. Some say the resurrection is an equinox thing simply because this is light overcoming night. Now, if that is true, then maybe in the Southern Hemisphere, they should practice Easter 6 months removed at their spring equinox. But globally, you see, 0 Libra is west of Earth, not west of New York or San Francisco. Like, that's different in any moment's time because we are on the surface of Earth spinning around Earth's cardinal directions, global directions, the points to which the cusps of the cardinal signs are aligned. Libra is west of the center of the Earth, where we all connect and measure planets and signs from. Aries, the Pisces Aries cusp of the tropical zodiac, of Earth's zodiac, is the place where the sun's path, the ecliptic plane, the plane of the year, the circle of the spirit, passes over or crosses the equator due east of the center of Earth. So why eggs? Because of the ancient fertility festivals associated with spring. The roses need our noses. And that's why bunnies too, because bunnies make bunnies babies on the regular. All right. So we get this also in older traditions, like in Germanic traditions known as Ostara, right? You often see that on the wheel of the year celebrated by the pagan peoples, right? So Oster was a goddess of the dawn. And the dawn, of course, happens in the west. That was just a test. That's dusk. Dawn is the east. So Oster, Easter. Now, as I say that, you might hear Esther. And for those of you who know, like Esther in Purim, that festival that celebrates her courage, it's happening at equinox time or thereabout. And so is Passover. And I feel just as the sun on the cross is about the sun of our sky at the cross of the ecliptic and the equator, and Easter is happening just like Ostara in the goddess of the dawn, or Ishtar, right, who is the Babylonian name for Venus, Inanna, an earlier name from Sumer, right? So Ishtar, well, Venus is an evening star, but also a morning star. In Greece, in Mexico, they had different names for morning star Venus than evening star Venus. In the Roman, like in the Latin language, evening star Venus Vesper, morning star Venus Lucifer. Why? Because the morning star brings the light bringer. So Ishtar, if Ishtar is associated with morning star, then I can really see the link to Easter, because east, of course, is the place of sunrise, of morning time. Now, why the ram's blood on the doors at Passover time? It's a strange thing. Let me put this away and we'll come back to it. It's a strange thing that in this 10th plague, if you know the tale, which, by the way, for me is like, it's hard for me to continue reading the Torah, the Old Testament, beyond that. Like, what kind of God would say, like, oh, my bad, I've been gone. Well, not my bad. I've been gone 400 years. What the hell happened to you? Oh, you're slaves. Wow, you need to leave here. Tell Pharaoh to let you go, he will. But you know what? Don't worry. We'll harden his heart. Isabel doesn't like it either, because he needs to be punished. So we need some locusts on this scene, frogs, right, to ruin the water. And then, the 10th plague is the firstborn of every house, including the stables, will die tonight. Except for those who sacrifice a lamb, and paint the blood above their door. Those doors will be passed over by the angel of death, right? Like, this is the origin of this term, Passover. But even back in the Hebrew, there's great debate of what in the heavens it was about. I think it's about something in the heavens, as I just showed you. I think it's about the sun passing over the equator. And why Esther and Easter and Ishtar and Ooster, like it's all east, 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 which in the English language, of course, it's easiest to hear, but nobody can, in East-er. Well, if it's an Easter thing, and if it's about passing over here, then shouldn't it be celebrated at the equinox? I think so, but not if you're working with a solely lunar calendar that actually aligns its months to the phases of the moon. And so the Passover tradition, of course, is going to come from the Hebrew calendar, which was the Babylonian, which was the Akkadian calendar, right? And if you're trying to align a Christian holiday, Easter, which is celebrating Christ's crucifixion of the Son on the cross, in alignment with the tale, which was a crucifixion after a Last Supper, which was Passover supper, you better align your Easter with Passover too. Now, with the Christian church wanting to distance itself from its, at least in Christ stories, like Hebrew roots over the centuries, right? They've also distanced the calculation, right? The astronomical calculation of Easter time. And now Easter's being celebrated by most Christians, I think, on the Sunday after the full moon, after the Aries equinox, or I'd like to say East equinox. Now, a fun thing there is equinox is Earth Sun, right? Whether this is about Earth orbiting the sun or from our point of view, the sun going around us. When we follow the light through the houses, we're, connecting to Earth's rotation. When we follow the sun through the signs, we are connecting to Earth's revolution or annual orbit. And for one moment each year in that annual orbit, our North Pole is leaning towards the sun, Cancer solstice. Halfway in between that northern lean and the southern lean, the sun is due west of the center of Earth, Libra equinox. Then we get to the southern side of the Earth's pole, leaning towards the light, solstice, right? Sun ingress Capricorn. And then we get to this place where the sun is due easter of the center of Earth, where we are all one. And many suggest that, of course, while every point of a circle is is the beginning of that circle. That if we did want to define one beginning of the astronomical circle called the ecliptic, the sun's path in the heart of the zodiac, we would choose that 0 Aries point. Astronomers call it the vernal equinox, and they measure celestial longitude from there. They also measure right ascension from there. Many astrologers, like many modern astronomers, begin the year when the sun gets to that Easter point, right? Which astrologers, at least tropical astrologers, would say is the sun ingressing Aries, the sign of the ram. Ram's blood. Anyway, so equinox, Earth, Sun. Full moon, Earth, Moon, Sun. So these are these two astronomical cycles. And then day of the week, Sunday. The day of gold, the day of the sun, just as Monday is Moon Day, the day of the moon, and Tuesday or Martes is Mars's day, and Miércoles, Mercury's day, Jueves, the day of Jupiter, Viernes, Venus's day, Saturn's day, Saturday, Sunday, right? And of course, we're going to, well, people will do Easter Sunday. Why? Because it is a solar cult. Now, I'm using that term as they would have back in the day, where there's lunar cults, there's Saturn cults, right? There's oak cults, probably coyote cults, right? I don't mean, well, to imply all sorts of things that may or may not be true, but I mean, this is sun worship. I believe in the rebirth of the sun. So the ram's blood thing is particularly tricky because in Egypt at that time, rams were sacred. Why? I mean, they were associated with Ra, at least with Ra Haraki, which is like a combination of Ra and Horus in a sense, but with Khnum, right? Like Khnum is the creator, at least in one of the many, many, many traditions that were alive during the many, many millennia of the land we now call Egypt. And all the way back to the first dynasty, Khnum, right, ram-headed, was the potter that on his pottery on his, what do we call it? The spinning thing on the lathe, created all of the beings, created us and all the things, like Khnum was also associated with the lifeblood of Egypt, the river Nile, right? And particularly with the silt that the Nile would deposit each year in the floods, the dark silt, right, which was necessary for resistance to drought, a good year of agriculture. And it was the dark silt that went into the beautiful pottery of that ancient tradition, right? So Khnum was the potter. Wait, Khnum, though, was ram-headed. Like in Egypt at this time, or so we believe, like rams were like seen as deities. Like you wouldn't sacrifice a ram, right? So like this is a pretty cold thing that those were instructed to do. But I also feel that ram in creation and ram in resurrection and ram in East is a very important thing. Well, let's talk about Westing and Easting, because I want to go to another tradition, which was the tradition of Kemet. So many have suggested that particulars in the story of Heru, who you may know as Horus, are pretty similar to the Christ tale. I mean, they're very, very different as well. But he was miraculously conceived, as Christ was. And Heru, or Horus, was born the Avenger. Why? To avenge his father's death. So his father, Osiris, or Asur, you probably know as Osiris, and his mother was Isis, who was Osiris's twin. But interestingly, there were twins. There were four. There was Osiris, Isis, Nephthys, and Set. Right? And Isis went with Osiris. And they were great leaders and brought civilization and much, much more. And Set was quite jealous and angry about this. He was the firstborn, he was the eldest, and he felt that Isis should have gone for him. And so he plotted to kill his brother Osiris. And there were actually two deaths. I won't tell the first, it'll take too long, but Isis discovers him and brings him back to life because she's quite powerful, right? And Set then kills him again, and this time maybe tries a little harder, cuts him up into 14 pieces and scatters them throughout the land of Kemet, the place we now call Egypt. And it's said that then this like scavenger hunt, Easter egg hunt happened where, Isis set out with, Nephthys and Jehuti, who you may know as Thoth or Thought. Anubis and others went to find these pieces of Osiris to put him back together. And it said that everywhere a piece was found, one of the great temples, the 13 temples of Egypt, was consecrated. Well, there were 14 pieces. One piece was never found. That, my friends, was the phallus, which it said Set threw to the Nile and was consumed by crocodiles. So now we're in a precarious situation because Isis doesn't want to bring Osiris back without this important piece. But that piece is particularly important in having an heir, which they did not yet have. And so it said that Jehuti, Thought, created a golden phallus, and Isis magically transformed herself into a bird and flew above, and in that magic became impregnated with their son, who would be born the Avenger, Heru Horus. It's said that Osiris was then mummified and that he went through the trials of the night, the underworld journey after westing, and then later rose again in the east. And interestingly, perhaps in some similarity to Osiris getting his eyes back, because it said that, or Orion getting his sight back, because Osiris, it said, is now in our heavens, being born and dying every day and night, as the stars that most of us know as Orion, who are here above the tree in this image with the moon between Orion at the face of the bowl and the Pleiades on the right. On the left, you see the brightest star of our sky, who is Isis, or Sothis, you might know as Sirius. So it said that Isis, the queen, and Osiris, the king, travel together in our sky. Well, who is Horus or Heru then? Maybe the bull's eye, the royal star Aldebaran that is so close? No, it was always known, of course, that Horus was the sun. In fact, it said that he's the Avenger because he's here to avenge his father's death. And he wins every morning at sunrise. And then he loses every night at sunset, which we call sunset because of his uncle Set, or Seth. Yeah? And that this is this eternal battle of day and night, right? So there was no misunderstanding. Horus is the sun of our sky. Now, there are other suns. Ra shows up, Kepher, but Horus, the falcon-headed avenger, is the sun. Okay. So Osiris is what we call Orion. Isis is Sirius, and Horus is the sun, which will travel through those constellations every year and taking them under the beams for their annual death and rebirth. For Sirius, at least in the latitudes of Heliopolis, I believe, back then, Sirius would disappear under the beams of the sun for 70 days and 70 nights, and it said that's why mummification is a 70-day process. Well, where was Horus born? I mean, in a sense, seeded from the golden phallus of Osiris, which you and I might know as the sword of Orion. One of the stars in Orion's sword is not a star at all. It's the Orion Nebula, which for me looks, it's just very feminine in a way, just in its look. But this is a nursery, it's a birthplace of stars. In fact, the Orion Nebula, according to modern astronomy, is the stellar nursery that is closest to the Earth. Now, it's not old enough to be the birth of the sun, our star, and therefore our solar system. I mean, therefore you, according to modern astronomy. But I think the ancient astronomers knew, and that it's embedded in this story that the son of our sky, Horus, was born from the golden phallus of Osiris, which is Orion's sword. There's other places we can go, like to use the term, Mesoamerican traditions, like the Maya traditions. These three stars that are now shown in a triangle, Orion's easternmost belt star and his 2 feet, they are called the hearthstones. And to this day, traditional Mayan villages will set up the tortilla griddle with 3 stones and then bring the central fire to the flame and the hearth of a new hearth, because those 3 stones represent these 3 stones of the sky, these 3 hearthstones, these 3 stars. Because why? They surround the smoke of creation. For the Lakota people, like, these stars are part of the sacred hoop where they say our souls come from. There's so many origin stories of this place of the heavens. I think they are actually alluding to, I'll say the truth, but that our sun, and therefore our earth, and therefore you and me, were born in the Orion Nebula. Now, astronomers these days would like smack me for saying that, but I'm already an astrologer. All right, let's show you this interesting truth. In the, I think, 17th century, this map was created of the constellations, where they kind of dusted the pagan off of them. So I can read to you from this. Julius Schiller, 1627, whose monumental star atlas, the Quorum Stellatum Christianum, 1627 to 1660, replaces all the traditional names of the constellations with Christian ones. They dusted the pagan off. The names of constellations in the northern hemisphere are inspired by the New Testament and early history of the church. Aries is now St. Peter, for example. The Corona Borealis is Christ's crown of thorns. Cassiopeia is Mary Magdalene. Right now, like, that's not the prettiest thing. If you know the story of Cassiopeia, the queen whose hubris demanded that she be basically thrown into the heavens, tied to her throne, so every night we could witness in her shame as she is held upside down, right? Probably the old church is tying Magdalene there in a sense to shame her, as too often is done. Now, I just want to say that when I recorded with History Ann the other day, she really spoke about this beautiful truth of what I called later the resurrection of Magdalene, of going from one type of lifestyle to a whole different type of lifestyle. And many of us have also entertained mysteries of Magdalene as the most special disciple of Christ, and in fact being his partner, his wife, and the mother of his child, perhaps. Now, dig this. The planets of the solar system also have new names. Saturn is Adam. Jupiter is Moses. The sun is Jesus Christ. The Earth moon, the Virgin Mary. Now, did the church embrace this? Did they reject this? So, look, there's a couple very interesting things here. Not only is the sun Christ, but Orion is Christ's father. Well, we need to be careful there, right? Of course, because Christ is said to be the Son of God, and through this miraculous birth, that didn't require a golden phallus, at least from the way it's recorded in the Bible. But interestingly, in Schiller's Christian version of the constellations, Orion has become Saint Joseph, right? Now, before we leave that, I want to honor this idea that Virgin Mary was, right, the moon was one of three Marys at the crucifixion. And for me, this is the sun on the cross, right? Easter. And then 3 days in the cave, which, by the way, sounds a bit more like the moon. Because every month or every month, the moon, the crone moon, sets interestingly in the east. I mean, she rises in the east, but that's the last we see of that old moon, the sliver crescent bow of Hecate. Then she goes into the flames of the sun to be renewed. And then the young moon, the maiden moon, Diana's bow, is found in the sunset west, where we receive visual evidence of her monthly trial by fire. And then the moon, night by night, will wax away from the sun and grow in phase until she's rising at sunset, the full moon, the full O. So I believe the three Marys might actually be a reference to the maiden moon, the mother moon, the full moon, and to the crone. It's hard, by the way, to find out just who the third Mary at the crucifixion was. Like, different quote unquote historians and researchers suggest different names. So Mother Mary's there, Magdalene's there. I mean, that's like mother and maiden. But at that time, Magdalene may have been carrying Christ's child. So many show the third Mary as a contemporary with like similar age to Virgin Mary, who would have been quite young, like at that time. But anyway, so young moon, full moon, old moon, maiden, mother, crone, right? All right, how's that land for you out there? There's this interesting question here in Catholic symbol. Who do you think is the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity, which would be like God, the Son, the Son? So, by the way, like, I don't want son to sound like some kind of boy child. And I think connecting it as the sun in our sky, which actually for me is spirit, which reflected through the light of soul incarnates into self here in matter, the place with the appearance of time and space, so we can make moves and grow, which is the only way the one only thing can ever change. And that's part of the cosmology that I will be presenting through the sacred systems of geometry, harmony, and more during this year of orbiting the planet. So the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Who's the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost? Yeah, for me, that's like the reflection of the one only light. And I'd rather not use the word father there either. I mean, I'll quote Hermes: the sun is its father, the moon its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth its nurse. The father of the perfection of the whole world is here. But he's speaking about the sun anyway. So in astrology, we often say the Holy Trinity is the sun, moon, and the rising sign, but that's the sun, moon, and earth, because the rising side is the ground beneath our feet, especially in the east. So I need to leave that there for now. We've been at this forever. I got some books to pack. But let me show you another thing. So we're speaking about like, wow, like pretty wild that these cats like sacrifice rams or lambs because of Kunum. But I'll show you why I believe that was, and it's because the ram at that time hosted the sun or the moon when they were east of the earth. It was the age of the ram. And when you look to the eastern sky, especially from the equator, here 38 degrees north, I have to tilt my head 38 degrees. But the eastern sky is the fountain of youth, and the stars in the east describe the ram horn shape. Stars that rise south of east head to the south. Stars that rise north of east head to the north. And then they hook back around like the horns of a ram to set in the west. And by the way, if you like took the ground away, you would find the Pisces glyph, right? Because the stars are coming to the east beneath the ground. You have that horizontal line in the Pisces glyph, which is the horizon, and then they separate away, but then they hook back around like the horns of a ram. And I'm sure this is why Khnum, why different images of ram in the east have been around for a long time, and why the ram is the Passover sacrifice. Oh, did Christ do that for Last Supper? Let's go there, my friends. And I feel like I had a quote to show in that regard. This one's a little bit too much to share on the screen without setting it up, which I will do after my What in the Heavens is the Zodiac class at Norwalk. I'm going to offer that class along with two others to present the mysteries of the turning of the ages in classes, I think in July and August. So please be on my mailing list if you're not already aligned through Constellations, which you can sign up for at GeminiBrett.com. Now, the east point of the zodiac, the Pisces-Aries cusp, moves through the constellations over time. And depending on how you do the math and how you draw the constellations and or divide sidereal signs, and it's like too much to say again right now, it might have been around this time at like 1850 BC when the east point precessed or moved retrograde from the constellation of the bull to the constellation of the ram, or at least from sidereal Taurus to sidereal Aries, which is the whole reason not to sacrifice a ram, but a huge reason to sacrifice a bull. All right, well, that happened too, right? So in these 40 years in the desert, right, Exodus, which is interestingly like correspondent perhaps, or smells a lot like the 40 days in the desert for Christ, right? In his trial. Like this is celebrated with the 40 days of Lent, yes? So from Ash Wednesday, where the cross is drawn on the forehead, and Lent begins. Right now, I'm not of that tradition, so please correct me or just forgive me if I'm completely wrong here, but Lent is actually like from that day of Ash Wednesday, there's 46 days until Easter Sunday because the Sundays are skipped. Many associate 40 days and 40 nights with Venus because that's about the time of the Venus retrograde, which interestingly, Venus Ishtar, right? Venus retrograde brings Venus from evening star into the beams of the sun, and then Venus is reborn in the middle of the retrograde period. In the east, Easter, Ishtar, you see. Oh, Venus retrograde's typically more like 42 days. There's another 40 I found recently in teaching sacred astronomy and then being with the sky to confirm this truth that it's not like this every cycle of Sun and Jupiter, which is about 400 days, 399, but some are 402. But Jupiter will disappear into the cave or into the fire or the light of the sun and then be reborn. It typically disappears for 40 days and 40 nights. So there's that as well. All right, so Ash Wednesday begins Lent, and then we come to Holy Week, right? So Palm, is it Wednesday? Oh my gosh, I'm ignorant. And this was nice to have historian here to speak about this. But, this is, in a way, the celebration, like it was in the Bible when Christ came to Jerusalem. And I think there's an astronomical thing to find there. He was greeted with these palms, right? This timing, this person was predicted. And, like the palms, like people go to service with the palms, and then the palms are then burned, and they're the ashes that are used the next year for Ash Wednesday, right? It's kind of a beautiful thing. 40 days and 40 years, by the way, for astrologers who practice with the amazing fractal timing technique of secondary progressions, where we turn days into years. There's something there, maybe. And by the way, at GeminiBrett.com, you can click on the courses page, and if you're good with pre-recorded things, tune into the 4-class session that's called Fractal Timing Techniques. It's amazing, if I do say so myself. You learn about progressions and directions and so much more. All right, anyway. Well, what about the sacrifice of the bull? This is a pretty interesting thing, right? There's like, let my people go, and then it finally happens after these 10 plagues and journeying through the desert, right? And let me see if I have slides for this. Yeah, it would seem I do, so let's go there. First of all, you have this interesting thing of Moses' staff turning into a serpent. I find that in the sun and the moon, and that's a tale for another time. But, we find all of these myths of like sacrificing a bull. Inanna, for example, after marrying the shepherd, so Ram, Dumuzid, she puts her ear to the ground, or sends her consciousness to the below, and hears the grief of her sister Erishkigal, who's grieving the death of her husband, Bugalana, the bull of heaven. Theseus, who kills the Minotaur, right? Theseus, who was raised by a shepherd. Mithras stabbing the bull. I could go on and on. These are mythic transmissions regarding the transition from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries, when the East Point precessed from bull to ram. And we find it certainly in the Bible after Moses receives the 10 Commandments, though one said, thou shalt not kill. There was one written above that of no false idols, right? And so when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai and sees that his people are worshiping this golden calf, as they had been instructed to in their time in Egypt during times of starvation and famine, which they were certainly experiencing, he saw them dancing about a false idol, and Moses and Aaron kill 3,000 of their own people, right? Well, the fact that it's a calf is very important, by the way, because precession moves from the highest degree of a sign to the lowest, or of a constellation to the lowest, if you will. And so the golden calf is the young bull, right? Well, at the end of 2,000 years of precessing through the constellation of the ram, at around the time of the birth of Christ, the East Point gets to the first star of, or the last, depending on which direction you're going through the zodiac, of the Fishes constellation, which of course are opposite the Virgin or the Priestess constellation. So what happens then, right? The Virgin Mary births the Lamb of God and the Good Shepherd and all that, right? Christ is called Lamb more than 20 times in the Bible. And then think about the miracle of the loaves and the fish, right? I just call this 1 BP for before Pisces, by the way. So loaves, priestess, Virgo, right? Fish, Pisces, constellational, right? What about the sun walking on water? You ever seen a sunrise? And actually, if you learn how to tell time, which because the month begins at sunset, that's where we see the young moon, the image of the beginning of the next month, right? If you know how to tell time the way it used to be done, then you will know when you decode the Bible that Jesus walked on water at sunrise. And if you ever seen the sunrise over the ocean, you've seen the sun walk on water, I would suggest. So now we come to an interesting time of the Last Supper. So Christ, when asked where the Passover supper shall be prepared, kind of has this age of Aquarius transmission. he tells the disciples this is from Mark 14. So, and the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, where wilt thou that we go and prepare that thou mayest eat the Passover? And he sendeth forth two of his disciples and saith unto them, go ye into the city, and there shall meet you a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him. And he will shew you a large upper room furnished and prepared. There make ready for us. And his disciples went forth, and he came into the city and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover. And in the evening he cometh with the 12. The 12. Well, let me bring you to the next page of that text. All right. And we'll skip the, is this the spawning of the age of Aquarius and the Gilligan's Island reference? Although it's a pretty fascinating one. That's a bunch of material I've put together that, again, I will teach in days to come. And I'll show you how this is all encoded also in Washington, D.C. I think it will probably be in June or July when I teach 3 classes about the 3 zodiacs and the turning of the ages. When is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and where we might also want to look. And I'm going to just find a different image of that because I got to stick with what's on the screen here. In the next page, I think Christ tells us about when we'll find the turning of the age here. So Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Well, anyone who's gotten away from the city lights has probably been astonished to see the clouds of heaven. That's the Milky Way band, which runs right above Orion's outstretched hand. In the center of the sacred hoop of stars, which feature many of the origin lights, including Orion's nebula, the golden phallus of Osiris. And I've given you too much while also giving you way too little to show you a bit about, the return of, to speak from a different tradition, one Hunanapu, like the hero twins from the Dark Rift, Xibalba Bay, and the underworld. We are living in a very important time. It's clearly expressed through many of the ancient prophetic traditions, including the Bible, I believe. It's painted on the dome of the United States Capitol building, which is the strangest thing. And I could go on and on and on. It's like Discerning Light says here, I'm curious, with several translations and versions of the Bible, seems a lot of the astrological messages are missing. Which version are you using? And I just want to honor that question because most versions there, instead of at the right hand of the Mighty One, say the right hand of power. In fact, I can't remember, and I need to find out before I teach this class, where that Mighty One translation comes from. It's something like the New American Standard Version or something. I do, when I play this game, like to go to Bible Gateway, where you can alternate between several different translations. I will say they have the King James Version in the Library of Congress, where we find the Zodiac on the square, and I'm kind of intrigued by that because many of these mysteries are encoded and perhaps addressed, and many of the temples of Washington, D.C. And it's something that I love to show. You can find many transmissions previously that I have online, but in the class coming up this summer, and I really should do one around the solstice, I'll be showing a whole other level of stuff that recently came through. That's quite intriguing. Is Jesus Christ a solar archetype? I don't know. I think Christ is the sun in the sky. And if so, well, he told you, you can be just like him. And many of the old traditions say that we will become stars if we do Earth right. Then I tell myself maybe next time. For there is no death. What West will simply lose its sight, and through after the underworld journey will again rise in the East resurrected. We can each be reborn many, many, many times. Perhaps we are every time we make a decision that we'd call right. Is Jesus Christ the light? Yeah, and I'm going to go get some of that light on my skin. Hopefully you enjoyed this journey. Please give the video a like. Please subscribe to the channel if you're watching in a place where you can. Please share this around with other mystics like us who are interested in decoding the riddles and the mysteries of the starry science and the ancient tales. Please don't share this with anyone who would crucify me. Also, I really hope that you will check out Constellations. So we're soon going to be updated. The page that you will go to if you type in geminibrett.com/constellations, like what's going to happen in this year ahead is a little bit different than what happened in the year behind, but you'll still get the gist. And that's the place to go if you want to sign up for $16 a month or $160 per year. That price is about to change, but I'm really excited, as I shared before, for my beloved Scorpiana to start joining me for transmissions, and she's going to hold a group coaching call every month as well. And I'm going to be with Anna presenting and with the community journeying to the sun and then the moon and then right here on Earth and the nodes and Mercury and Venus throughout the next 10 months, beginning on May 2nd. So I hope you come be with us. Lila asks, is that journey being symbolic of the return of Christ? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really what Easter is about. And by the way, I would just celebrate it at equinox, and I do. But until for another time, it also needs to align with moon. So again, the magical days of the week, Sunday, because it's a solar cult after the full moon, the mother moon, after the equinox. Pretty amazing how they're doing that these days. There's a lot of astronomy learned just in the way that the calendar aligns Easter. Thanks so much for being here. Also, if you want to buy me a cup of tea, you can find a donate link at geminibrett.com, or also find a sessions page. Sign up for a session. I love to tune in with the light that is you. That's what I do. I got a baby to feed, so help the cause. But especially sign up for Constellations, because it would be so nice to be able to connect with you and hear your voice. That's a very unique thing about the community. At the School of Astrology, like we have community discussions where everybody's mic's on. It's not just me talking and reading comments, which I also love to do. And thank you for allowing me to by offering this beautiful gift, this amazing, stellar present of your presence. Next week, no storytelling hour, because we are moving. So please forgive me for not being around at that time next Wednesday. Hopefully this long one will cover both. See you in space, folks.